let's talk about why having a frugality mindset won't cut it. So I want to start out by saying that I was raised to be frugal. That's what I grew up with. I remember the coupon cutting, the change counting. We didn't have cable, all these kinds of things that were ways that my parents, specifically my mom, who took care of a lot of the finances, handled things. And the focus was always on how you could cut back. And that helped me a lot. I mean, in my life in college, knowing that I could control some of my finances, not just by working all these jobs, but also by having some control over it in terms of what I spent, was really huge for me. And coming out of college into the workforce, becoming a teacher, it was still really helpful for me because I was on a debt-free journey. And a lot of the personal finance advice that I got while I was in this space was very similarly frugality focused. What ways can you cut back to set yourself up for the future? And I have to say, like, there is a lot of stuff that's really good about that. Like, I want to make sure that everybody's always intentional with how they're spending. But I think there's a dark side to frugality in that it doesn't actually heal the deprivation mindset that it comes from. It's more like a band-aid on the problem versus a solution. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you guys about today, because I think I found a blueprint that works for me that I hope will work for you too. And it's what I like to call being unfrugal. The first tenet of living an unfrugal life is that you prioritize the costs that matter to you most and you question everything else. So one aspect of the frugality mindset that I grew up with was that spending more money on something was always bad. The cheapest option was the option. That was what you chose, right? Regardless of considering the quality or value of the thing that you were purchasing. It left no room for considering what the most appropriate choice would be, and was really only focused on how much money it cost. I think that this led me to undervalue things. In a world where all my things were always breaking or falling apart, items didn't have a lot of value to me. It's part of why I never had an issue with spending very little money on fast fashion that was cheaply and unethically made, and would fall apart and therefore contribute to the waste in our environment right now, because I didn't see any value in items because I was just taught that you spent the least you could and that was what you did. Now I truly consider every one of my consumer purchases, and I choose the best option for myself, weighing in the footprint that I'm leaving behind with that option. Of course, cost is always a factor in my considerations, but I no longer just default to the cheapest option. And that's created more value for things in my life, as well as reduced my footprint on the earth. Something else I do that's part of my unfrugal life is I pay a lot of money in rent. I prioritize the cost of rent in the city because I love living in the city, and I cut back on a lot of other stuff. I don't spend extravagantly on items or eating out or anything like that because I prefer the location of where I live. And that's something I feel very, very strongly about because it brings me a lot of joy in my life. So that's one example of living an unfrugal life, is I'm prioritizing something that costs a lot, but it's so worthwhile to me, and I'm able to do that by cutting back on the things that don't. So frugality is not the only focus there. Cost is one factor, but livelihood is the priority. The second tenet of living an unfrugal life is that you don't fret about money because you control where it goes. Now, this next statement does not hold true for all frugal people, but I know that frugality in my family was often kind of a mask or a band-aid for money insecurity. My parents did not budget, but they felt like because they were scrimping and saving, and because they were cutting back and they were doing the whole coupon thing, and they were spending as little as they possibly could on so many things, that they were doing everything in their power. And it's not bad to cut back on costs. No one is saying that. But being frugal cannot replace having a plan for your money. also known as a budget. You need to know where your money is going each month, and simply cutting back on everything is not going to make up for not knowing. Plus, when you know where your money is going every month, you get to decide what you want to spend that money on, which again means you can prioritize the things that matter to you most and cut back on the things that don't. And the third and final tenet that of living an unfrugal life that I just made up is that you invest in yourself. This is one aspect of my ideal unfrugal life that I'm still growing into. As always, I'm working on combating my own deprivation mindset, and one of the ways I'm actually taking action in this is through investing in myself. This means that I put money, not just my time, effort, and energy, into my education, my business, and my personal growth and development. I used to be willing to put so much time and energy into all these things, but I completely drew the line at money. For example, I would work out at home instead of spending money on a gym membership that I actually would have gotten a lot of value out of. Or I would spend hours on my business while refusing to spend a cent. Or during school, I would take every single affordable educational opportunity, but immediately rule out every one that would cost something or cost too much, no matter how meaningful that would have been to me. And I can't count the number of things that I probably missed out on because I was holding on to this frugality mindset. This was truly how I thought about everything. Everything was through a lens of money. And it's so interesting because now that I actually talk about money all the time, it matters less and less because it's not really about money anymore like it was when I was frugal. It's about my life and my goals and my dreams. And I know I'm not alone in this. I have to actively work against my frugality mindset and realize that money is a tool meant to be spent according to my values. So if I truly value my education, my business, my personal growth and development, if I truly value those things, then they're exactly what I should be spending my money on. Again, I've identified myself with the term frugal for pretty much my whole life. I know countless people in my life, as well as tons of online personal finance writers who still identify that way. So I don't want to be totally divisive with this and say that frugality is the devil, because it's not. I actually think that frugality done correctly can be a virtue. In fact, I think that this idea of frugality and this idea of unfrugality are more complementary than they are opposing. Here's where I want to challenge your thinking. How might your life be better if you worked to live unfrugally instead? What I want you to focus on is how can you be spending your money more intentionally, whether you're doing that from a lens of frugality or unfrugality. Every choice that you make with your money should be meaningful and should improve your life in some way. I've noticed that educators especially tend to have a certain degree of forced frugality because we're in a field where we notoriously don't get paid as much and don't have as high of an earning potential. But what's so fascinating to me about educators is that we tend to have really good spending habits, but poor money management habits. In other words, we're pretty frugal, or usually more frugal than the average American, because we know we don't make a lot, but we demonstrate the same avoidance behaviors that the average American does, despite the fact that we have better spending habits. But teachers, when they're focused, have so much more potential for financial abundance than we ever even realize. In Chris Hogan's book, Everyday Millionaires, which is the largest study of United States millionaires to this date, he cites one of his most shocking finds. The top 3 professions that millionaires held, I love this so much, were engineers, accountants, and number 3 was teachers. Just let that sink in for a second. We, the notoriously underpaid and undervalued career field, are in the top ranks with engineers and accountants when it comes to wealth building. We have vastly more limitations than those 2 career fields do when it comes to our earning potential, and I would argue in many cases our time and energy, but we don't lack the capacity or the grit that it takes to achieve financial freedom. We have to fight against every barrier specific to us, and we still compete with high-paid engineers and people who literally manage money for a living. I believe that teachers need to learn to be unfrugal, meaning they do the 3 things I outlined. Prioritize the costs that matter the most and question everything else. Do not fret about money because you control where it goes. And number 3, invest in yourself. It's time to get started.